Afternoon. Welcome to St. Peter's in Hove. I'm Father Alexander, and welcome to our 152nd step in our walking tour through the Bible. And we're still in the midst of the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms being, I think, one of the richest books in the entire Bible. So we're going to spend a lot of time on the book of Psalms. I have a funny feeling. I'm not really sort of apologizing for that because I think we really need to spend as much time as possible as we can on the Psalms. Quite often in the Mass, they're sort of skipped over. And of course, not everybody says the breviary, so not everybody is as familiar with the Psalms as they ought to be. Now we get to the 35th Psalm, otherwise 36, depending on how you're counting. The one that starts off, sin speaks to the sinner in the depths of his heart. Now, going back about 50 years ago, some theologians came up with this idea of the fundamental option. And this caused a lot of kerfuffle and a lot of furore, largely because I have to say the concept of the fundamental option was not properly understood. And some people even went so far as to say that John Paul II, in his great encyclical on moral theology, entitled Veritatis Splendor, dismissed or condemned the fundamental option. He did nothing of the sort, of course, because the fundamental option is actually to be found in the Holy Scriptures. And here we have it. Sin speaks to the sinner in the depths of his heart. Now, in the Hebrew Scriptures, as we know, the heart is the seat of decision, the seat of feelings, and it is, if you like, the seat of one's orientation. The heart is what makes the decisions rather than the minds. For us, Westerners, we often talk about he decided, that is to say, he made up his mind, this bit here. But in fact, we often say, oh, well, this was a decision of the heart, this bit here. But sometimes you say it was a decision that was motivated by the guts, the gut feeling, that bit down there. When we make a decision, the decision is actually made by all three. It's a decision of the head, it's a decision of the heart, it's a decision of the guts. In other words, it's the whole person that makes a decision rather than sort of something that doesn't really affect us. The whole person makes a decision. The whole person, if you like, crosses a line, takes up a position thanks to that decision. Sin speaks to the sinner in the depths of his heart. In other words, sin has taken over the heart of the sinner. Sin has taken over the depths of the heart of the sinner. Think of sin a bit like Heineken beer. It's reached the parts that you didn't know were even there. It's reached the parts that other beers don't reach. In other words, this man, the sinner, hasn't just done something wrong. He is, as we say in demotic English, he is a wrong 'un in himself. It's not that he does bad things, though he does do bad things, by the way. It's rather that he is a bad man, a corrupted man. He's like that fruit tree that our blessed Lord talks about. He produces rotten fruit because he's a rotten tree. And indeed, our blessed Lord says very clearly, does he not? It's what comes out of a man that makes him bad, not what he eats and which passes out through his stomach and into the sewer. What comes out of a man that makes him bad. So I think here we've got a very good idea of what is meant by the fundamental option. This sinner has made a fundamental option for evil. Now, the fundamental option was not a single choice, but rather it was the building up of numerous choices that hardened eventually into this corrupted character. As you know, I'm trying to think, yes, if you don't wash something properly, like your kettle, the inside of your kettle, and who does, admit it, you may not be doing this, and you live in a place with hard water, eventually the kettle becomes all furred up. And you get this hardened calcium on the inside of the kettle, and it becomes very hard to remove that hardened calcium. If, however, you scrub out the interior of your kettle every day to make sure that the calcium doesn't build up, then you won't get a build-up of calcium, and you have a nice, shiny, clean kettle on the inside. And similarly with the with sin. If we tolerate a small sin, eventually these sins will grow into will tolerate bigger sins until we will become hardened sinners. So that's basically if you like, the mental furniture you need to understand the fundamental option. Sin speaks to the sinner in the depths of his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes. Maybe once he had the fear of God before his eyes. Maybe once he said, well, I think I'll sin. Oh, mind you, there's this other course of action I could take. Well, maybe God might, punish me for this and stuff. But now all fear of God has died. The sin has killed it. And do not think for a moment that sin and virtue can coexist. They can't. They're at constant war, and one will win in the end. Either we'll become hardened sinners or we'll become saints. And if we think that we can do something wrong and something right at the same time, we can't. One of them will lose out. So don't think you can be a Catholic and worship God and at the same time hold doctrines which are clean contrary to Catholicism in your heart, because this contradictoriness destroys what is good within you. He so flatters himself in his mind that he knows not his guilt. In his mouth are mischief and deceit. All wisdom is gone. Now, he can't really reproach himself for sinning because he's flattered himself into thinking that sin is right. And this, of course, is the hallmark of the hardened sinner. The hardened sinner always thinks he or she is right about everything. Stalin thought he was right about everything, by the way. Hitler thought he was right about everything, by the way. Hitler, if you remember in that wonderful film, Der Untergang, Downfall, at the end, he blames everybody in 1945 for the ruin of Germany. Everybody except himself, that is. All the others were wrong. I should have had you all shot, he said, like Stalin. Stalin was right. So, what perversity, eh? Being a sinner gives us a perversity of self-perception. We cannot see ourselves being wrong. And it also makes us perverse in the sense that we're no longer able to reason properly. All wisdom is gone. In other words, sin destroys our moral goodness, but also destroys our ability to think. Sinners are people who are perverse. They don't accept logic and they don't accept truth. And they don't accept reason. They tell us all sorts of things that cannot possibly be true. And you can see this very clearly nowadays in the war going on in Ukraine. You can see it very clearly in the Second World War. And you can see it very clearly, I am afraid to say, in the abortion debate. People who believe abortion to be a legitimate object of choice have lost all their wisdom. He plots the defeat of goodness as he lies on his bed. He has set his foot on evil ways. He clings to what is evil. He set his foot on evil ways. He walks in the paths of sinners, and that path has been smoothed. That's the primrose path that leads, of course, as Shakespeare so rightly puts it, to the everlasting bonfire. He clings to what is evil. He cannot, because it's become so habitual, he cannot undo the habit of a lifetime. When somebody clings to something, you've got to prise their fingers off it. They're so attached. So people sin and become attached to their sin. It's a pretty good picture of what sin is all about here. It doesn't talk about what the actual action is. It's rather the love of evil in itself. This evil can take many, many forms. And then something completely different. So we talked about the sinner, now we talk about the virtuous man. Your love, Lord, reaches to heaven, your truth to the skies. The virtuous man sees love and truth everywhere. Love and truth go together. Your justice is like God's mountain. Your judgments like the deep. To both man and beast you give protection. O Lord, how precious is your love. My God, the sons of men find refuge in the shelter of your wings. Now, just as the sinner is a habitual offender, the person who lives a righteous and true and virtuous life lives habitually under the shelter of the wings of God. And the key thing in both the sinner and the virtuous man, the key thing they have in common is habit. Virtue is sin, is a habit. Virtue is a habit. Virtue is a habitual reliance on God. And because it's a habit, you don't even know it's there. You don't have to dedicate yourself to God every day of your life because you are already dedicated to God. That is your way of living. You rely on God. To bird and both and beast, you give protection. When you walk down the road, you feel as a man or a beast, you are protected by God. You are surrounded by the love of God. Oh Lord, how precious is your love. It's like the air that surrounds us. They feast, the virtuous, on the riches of your house. They drink from the stream of your delight. In you is the source of life, and in your light we see light. So, whereas the sinners are in a state of darkness, all wisdom is gone. In God, the more we get to know God, the more we know, the more light there is. And of course, they drink from the stream of your delight. Anybody who's ever lived in a dry or arid country, like myself, will know how beautiful it is to see a stream. Streams are the most gorgeous things. And you see, and when, of course, you're thirsty and so on, you love to drink from streams. It can be dangerous, but sometimes that's what we do. And the stream just fills you with absolute pleasure. And similarly, the love of God is like a stream that flows and flows and gives pleasure to all and brings delight wherever it passes and brings fertility and fruit and things like that as it passes. And to drink from the stream of God's delight again shows us the habitual, the joy we have in the goodness of God. God is good, and this doesn't stop us enjoying ourselves. Rather, it is in the goodness of God that we experience joy. And then the psalmist says, keep on loving those who know you, doing justice for upright hearts. Well, asking God to keep on being God, which he will do. Let the foot of the proud not crush me, nor the hand of the wicked cast me out. And then he says, well, so the wicked are always plotting against us, but please protect us from the wicked. And then he says, see how the evildoers fall, flung down, they shall never arise. And indeed, when we think of the great evildoers of history, they all ended rather badly, didn't they? And the great evildoers of today, they will end badly as well. Of course, it will take some time for us to have to see that. But we cannot envy the wicked, even though they seem to prosper. Rather, they will end badly. So there we are. Let us be on the side of virtue. All the best.